The horse was going to die. Sadie knew it the moment she saw him. A massive black destrier collapsed at the edge of the ashwood, half buried in the mud left behind by 3 days of unrelenting autumn rain. His flanks heaved with the effort of each breath, shallow and wet-sounding, the kind of breathing that did not belong to a living creature much longer. One of his forelegs was bent at an angle that made her stomach turn, and a deep gash ran along his left shoulder, crusted with dark blood and something worse, the greenish tinge of a wound already beginning to rot. She had been gathering pine bark and wolf moss for the village healer, Master Aldrich, when she nearly tripped over the animal in the gray morning fog. Her basket dropped. She didn't stop to pick it up. "Easy," she whispered, crouching low, her worn leather boots sinking into the mud as she approached. "Easy now. I see you." The horse lifted his head, enormous, proud even in suffering, and his dark eyes fixed on her with something between fury and desperation. A war horse. She could tell by the breadth of his chest, the scarred musculature of his neck, the remnants of a saddle that had slipped sideways and now hung at a useless angle against his ribs. The saddle's leather was stamped with a marking she did not recognize in the dim morning light. She didn't look closely. There was no time. She worked fast, the way Master Aldrich had taught her, not with panic, but with purpose. First, the gash. She tore the lower hem of her underskirt without hesitation, pressing the linen against the wound with both hands, holding pressure while the horse shuddered and stamped his free legs against the mud. Cold soaked through her knees. The forest smelled of pine sap and wet earth and blood, and her breath made small white clouds in the chill air. "You're not dying today," she told him quietly, not as a comfort, but as a decision. It took her the better part of the morning to do what needed doing. She ran back to the village, a small Omega settlement called Dunveth, 36 cottages huddled at the base of the Ashwood Hills, and returned with a wooden cart, 2 lengths of rope, a clay pot of her best drawing salve, and old Bram the blacksmith's mule, borrowed with a hasty explanation and a promise she would explain later. Getting the destrier onto the cart was the hardest thing she had done in recent memory. The horse fought her. She did not blame him. She spoke to him the entire time. Low, steady words that meant nothing and everything, until at last his great body surrendered to exhaustion and allowed her to guide him. She brought him to the small stable behind Master Aldrich's healing house, the one used for livestock that needed tending. She cleaned the wound with boiled water and juniper oil, packed it with the drawing salve and fresh moss, and wrapped the leg in strips of oiled cloth to support the joint, which was sprained rather than broken. A mercy. Then she covered him with the 2 heaviest blankets she owned, fed him water from a bucket she held herself because he would not drink from the trough, and sat beside him on the straw while the cold crept in through the stable walls and the light outside went from gray to gold to gray again. She fell asleep there, her blonde braid trailing over her shoulder and into the hay, her gray cloak pulled tight around her. She was 23 years old and had been an Omega all her life, which meant she had learned early that the world was not built for her comfort. She had learned to find satisfaction in smaller things, in a wound that closed cleanly, in a fever that broke at dawn, in a creature that was dying and then, slowly, was not. She did not know the horse's name. She did not know his master's name either, though she would, soon enough. By the 3rd morning, the destrier could stand. Sadie stood beside him in the pale light, her hand flat against his neck, feeling the warmth return to his skin. The wound on his shoulder had begun to close, the ugly green tinge replaced by the healthy pink of healing flesh. He was eating now, not well, but eating, and he had stopped flinching when she touched him. "You are terribly proud for someone who was face down in the mud 2 days ago," she told him. She had taken to calling him Shadow, because she had to call him something. Shadow tossed his head in what she chose to interpret as agreement. She was refilling his water bucket from the well behind the healing house when she heard them. Hoofbeats. Not one horse. Many. The sound of iron-shod hooves on the stone road that passed through Dunveth was unusual enough to make her pause, bucket in hand, and turn toward the narrow gap between the stable and the stone wall. Through that gap, she could see the road. There were 6 riders, armored in black leather and iron, their cloaks the deep gray of storm clouds. They rode in a formation that was not decorative. It was protective, deliberate, the spacing of trained warriors. And at the center of that formation was a man who was not wearing a helmet. He should have been. The cold was sharp enough that the other riders wore their hoods drawn, faces half hidden. But this one rode bareheaded, as though the weather was beneath his notice or simply irrelevant to whatever calculations his mind was making. He was large, even on horseback. The scale of him was apparent. Broad through the shoulders, straight-backed, with the ease of a man who had spent more time in a saddle than out of one. His hair was black and worn in long braids pulled back from his face, and even at this distance she could see the sharp cut of his jaw, the way his blue eyes, unnervingly pale, moved over the village with an expression that was not unkind, but was absolutely, entirely without uncertainty. He was looking for something. Sadie watched him stop one of the village men. She recognized Edric the cooper, who immediately bowed so low his cap fell off, and speak to him briefly. Edric pointed toward the healing house. Sadie's hand tightened on the bucket handle. She turned back to the stable, set the bucket down, and was smoothing hay from her cloak when she heard the stable door open behind her. She turned. He filled the doorway. That was the only way to describe it. Not that he was simply standing there, but that the space itself seemed to rearrange around him, the shadows drawing back, the cold air shifting. The scar on his face caught the pale morning light, a thin line that ran from his left cheekbone toward his jaw, old and silver white. His eyes found her immediately, and then moved past her to the horse. Something crossed his face. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Shadow, the great black destrier who had fought her for 2 full days, who had kicked the water bucket across the stable that first night and nearly taken her arm off, raised his head and made a sound she had never heard him make before. Low, almost gentle. The man in the doorway walked past her without a word, straight to the horse, and placed one large hand against the animal's neck. Shadow pressed into it. Sadie stood very still. Then the man turned and looked at her fully for the first time, and she felt the weight of those pale blue eyes like a physical thing. Not cruel, but absolute. "You did this," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said, because she was an Omega and she was not stupid and she understood now what she was looking at. She understood it in the way a person understands thunder, not from seeing it, but from feeling the air change. His gaze moved over her, the mud still on her cloak from 3 days ago, the chapped skin of her hands, the dark circles beneath her eyes from sleeping on stable straw. "Why?" he asked. Sadie blinked. Of all the things she had expected him to say, that was not among them. "Because he was dying," she said. The Alpha King of Valdenor looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he said, "What is your name?" And the morning held its breath. "Sadie," she said. "My name is Sadie." He repeated it once, quietly, as though testing the weight of it. Then he looked away from her and back to the horse, and the strange intensity of that moment dissolved into something more practical. Though not entirely. She could still feel the echo of it in her chest, like the vibration of a bell long after the strike. "His name is Cinder," the man said. She almost laughed. The great black destrier, dark as a moonless night. Cinder. There was something almost tender in that contradiction, and it told her more about this man in 3 seconds than most people revealed in 3 years. "Cinder," she repeated, and the horse flicked one ear toward her voice. She took that as a small private victory. The man, the king, she reminded herself, the Alpha King, though the word still sat strangely in her mind when she looked at him standing in her borrowed stable in the thin morning light, ran his hand along Cinder's shoulder, fingers finding the edge of the bandaged wound with a careful precision that surprised her. He pressed gently, testing. "The joint," he asked without looking at her. Sprained, not broken, she said. He needs another 4 days of rest before any weight is placed on it. The wound on his shoulder was infected when I found him. I drew it out with salve and pine resin. It's closed now, but the tissue is still fragile. If you ride him before the 7th day, you risk reopening it. A pause. He turned his head and looked at her over his shoulder. You speak like a healer. I trained under one, she said. Master Aldrich. He serves this village. An Omega healer. Yes. Something moved in his expression. Not dismissal, she realized, but recalibration, as though he was revising a calculation. 7 days, he said, turning back to Cinder. At least, she said, and felt her pulse tick upward at her own boldness. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the King's Guard will take him. If the King's Guard rides him out of the stable before the 7th day, Sadie said carefully, you will lose him to infection within a fortnight. The road will open the shoulder wound. The joint, stressed before it is ready, will stiffen. He will never carry a rider again. She paused. My lord. The words sat between them. Outside, she could hear one of the mounted guards shifting in his saddle, the creak of leather and the soft chink of iron. The wind moved through the stable eaves with a low, hollow sound. Theron, she did not know his name yet, not truly, turned and faced her fully. He was even more imposing head-on. The crossed leather straps of his chest armor, the dark fur mantle across his shoulders, the sheer physical authority of his presence, all of it pressed against her like a wall of heat. But his eyes, those pale and unsettling blue eyes, were watching her with something she had not expected. Not anger. Not the cold dismissal she had braced for. Attention. You would tell an Alpha King, he said slowly, what he cannot do with his own horse. Sadie met his gaze. Her hands, hidden in the folds of her cloak, were trembling slightly, but her voice was not. I would tell anyone, she said, what will happen to a patient in my care if they are moved too soon. That is not a matter of rank, my lord. That is a matter of bone and blood, and what happens when you ignore both. The silence stretched. Then, and she would think about this moment for a long time afterward, the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something smaller and more real than a smile. 7 days, he said. He left 4 of his guards in Dunveth. Not to watch her, she was told, to watch Cinder, but she was not naive enough to believe those 2 things were entirely separate, and she suspected neither was he. The guards were polite in the stiff, trained way of men who had been given specific instructions about politeness. They camped in the clearing beside the healing house, raised a small oilskin shelter against the continuing rain, and took turns posting at the stable entrance as though Cinder were a dignitary rather than a recovering horse. The eldest of them was a beta named Oswin, broad-faced and gray-templed, with the kind of watchful stillness that came from decades of standing in rooms where powerful people made dangerous decisions. He introduced himself the first evening when Sadie came to check Cinder's bandages by torchlight. He'll send word when he returns, Oswin said from his post at the stable door, watching her work. He doesn't need to, Sadie said, unwinding the outer wrap to examine the wound beneath. The flesh was warm but not hot. Good. No renewed swelling. I'm not expecting anything. He always sends word, Oswin said. There was something in his tone she couldn't quite read. He doesn't forget debts. Sadie glanced up. This isn't a debt. I found an injured animal, and I treated him. That's all. Oswin looked at her steadily for a moment. That animal, he said, has carried King Theron through 7 battles. He has never allowed another living soul to approach him willingly. He nodded toward Cinder, who was standing calmly, while Sadie's hands worked across his bandages. I've been with the King's Guard for 19 years, mistress. I have seen men lose fingers trying to stable that horse. A pause. He let you put blankets on him. Sadie looked at Cinder. Cinder looked back at her with his enormous dark eyes. "He was cold," she said simply. Oswin made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. 3 days passed. Sadie learned that the king had ridden out toward the northern border, where there had been a skirmish with a rival pack. "The Veldris clan," Oswin said, without elaborating. She did not ask. The politics of alpha packs were not her concern. She had plants to dry, a village child with a chest cough to tend, and a recovering warhorse to monitor. She also had, increasingly, a problem. His name was Rowan, and he was the village headman's son, a beta of 26, handsome in a conventional way, with brown hair and easy confidence and the particular manner of a man who had never been told no by anyone he considered worth telling him. He had been circling Sadie for the better part of a year, not with cruelty, but with a persistence she found exhausting. He did not understand that her lack of interest was genuine rather than an obstacle to be overcome. On the 4th day, he appeared at the stable while she was measuring a new compress for Cinder's shoulder. "The king's men are eating through the village's autumn grain stores," he said by way of greeting, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. His eyes moved to Cinder and then back to her. "My father thinks you should have sent the beast on his way when you found him." "Your father's opinion on horse medicine is noted," Sadie said, not looking up. "It's not about horse medicine." Rowan stepped inside. "It's about attention, Sadie, the kind you don't want." She paused her work and looked at him. "A king's guard camped in Dunveth for a week," he said. "People are asking questions. About the horse. About who saved it. About you." "Let them ask," she said. "You don't understand what it means when an alpha king takes notice of someone like—" He stopped himself. "Someone like me," she finished quietly. The words fell between them with the particular weight of things that were true and unwelcome. An Omega. A healer's apprentice in a village of no consequence at the edge of a forest no one important had reason to visit. She knew what she was. She had always known. "I'm trying to protect you," Rowan said, and she believed him, in the way she believed a man could mean well and still be entirely wrong. "I appreciate that," she said. "But Cinder is not ready to travel, and I will not release him before he is. Whatever comes of that is what comes of it." Rowan looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. "He is not a man who forgets people," he said, "or lets them go." He left before she could answer. She stood in the quiet of the stable, Cinder's warm breath moving against her shoulder, and thought about that. She didn't know yet whether it was a warning or something else entirely. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Through the open top of the stable door, she could see the sky beginning to clear, and somewhere far above the Ashwood Hills, the first pale stars of evening were appearing one by one, cold and very bright. On the 7th day, before dawn, she heard hoofbeats again. More of them this time. She was already awake. Something had pulled her from sleep an hour before the hoofbeats came. A shift in the air, a change in pressure. The way the night felt different just before something important entered it. She had learned to trust that feeling years ago, when Master Aldrich told her that healers who ignored their instincts buried more patients than those who listened to them. She was dressed and in the stable when the riders came through the village gate. Cinder heard them first. He raised his head, ears forward, and made that same low sound she had heard once before, the sound he made for only one person. His dark eyes found the stable door. His breathing changed. She had spent 7 days learning every variation of this animal's behavior, and what she saw now was not agitation or fear. It was recognition, and something very close to relief. She understood that too. She was straightening Cinder's blanket, giving her hands something to do, when the stable door opened and Theron stepped inside. He was different from the first time, not in any way she could have easily named. He was still the same imposing figure, the same black braids, the same crossed leather armor and dark fur mantle. But there was mud on his boots that went up past the ankle, and a fresh cut above his right brow, recently cleaned but not yet healed. and the set of his shoulders carried something heavy that had not been there before. He had come from something difficult. She did not ask what. He went to Cinder immediately, and the horse pressed his great head against the man's chest, and Theron stood very still with one hand on Cinder's jaw and closed his eyes for just a moment, so brief that she might have imagined it. She decided she had imagined it, and turned to gather her supplies from the shelf. "How is he?" Theron said. Not a question. The words had the shape of a question, but the tone of a man who already needed the answer to be good. "He is well," she said. "The wound has closed fully. The joint is sound. I tested the range of movement yesterday morning. He is eating well and his breathing is clear." She paused, then added, "He will carry you again without any lasting damage. That I can promise." Theron was quiet for a moment. His hand moved slowly along Cinder's neck. "You stayed with him," he said. "Of course," she said, because to her there was no other answer. He turned and looked at her. In the torchlight, she had lit 2 wall torches when she rose, and they threw warm gold across the straw and stone. His pale eyes were less cold than she remembered, or perhaps she was simply less frightened than she had been 7 days ago. "I am Theron," he said, "King of Valdenor." She met his gaze. "I know who you are, my lord." "Then you know that what you did, keeping him here, refusing to release him early, was within your right as his healer, but not without risk to yourself." "I know that as well." "And you did it anyway." "A healer who releases a patient before healing is complete," and she said, "is not a healer. She is simply someone who gives up when it becomes inconvenient not to." Something shifted behind his eyes. It was subtle, the way deep water moved below a still surface, and she felt the strange sensation of being seen, not examined, not assessed, but genuinely seen, in a way that was entirely unfamiliar and not entirely comfortable. "I owe you a debt," he said. "You owe me nothing, my lord. I would have done the same for any animal." "That," he said, with a quietness that carried unexpected weight, "is precisely why the debt exists." He stayed until morning. Not in the stable. He was a king, and his guard had arranged the use of the headman's great room for the night. But he came back to the stable at first light, and she was there again, as she always was, and they stood on opposite sides of Cinder in the pale dawn, and spoke in the low, practical way of people who had a task in common. He asked about the treatment she had used. She explained: the drawing salve, the juniper oil, the pine resin, the method of wrapping the joint. He listened with genuine attention, asking precise questions that revealed a mind accustomed to gathering information and using it rather than discarding it. She found herself answering more freely than she had intended. "Where did you learn joint wrapping?" he asked. "Master Aldrich taught me the basics," she said, smoothing the final layer of Cinder's travel bandage, lighter now for the road but still protective. "The pine resin technique I worked out myself, 3 winters ago. A shepherd brought a dog in with a similar wound. I didn't have enough salve and had to improvise." "Did it work?" "The dog lived another 6 years," she said. He almost smiled again. She was beginning to recognize the signs, a slight relaxation around his eyes, a barely perceptible shift at the corner of his mouth. It was not a man who smiled easily, she thought, which meant the moments when he came close to it were worth something. She tied off the bandage and stepped back to assess. Cinder stood steady and square, weight even on all 4 legs. "Good. He's ready," she said. Theron looked at the horse for a long moment, then he looked at her. "Come to Valdenor," he said. The words landed with such quiet certainty that it took her a full breath to understand them as an offer and not a command. "My lord?" "As a healer," he said. "The castle's appointed healer Brennan is competent with men and battle wounds. He has less skill with animals, and the royal stables house 47 horses that are essential to the kingdom's military capacity." He paused. "You have skill, and a way with difficult creatures," I am an Omega, she said. The words came out more quietly than she intended. I am aware of that. The court, he said, with a flatness that closed the subject entirely. Answers to me. Sadie was quiet. She looked down at her hands, chapped, stained faintly green from the pine resin, nails short and practical. The hands of a woman who worked. She thought of Dunveth, of the small room behind the healing house where she slept, of Master Aldrich, who was getting old and whose eyesight was failing, but who had never once made her feel that her rank made her less capable. She thought of Rowan, and what he had said. He is not a man who forgets people, or lets them go. I would need to speak with Master Aldrich, she said carefully. Naturally. And I would need it understood, she continued, looking up at him, that my role is to treat animals in my care as I see fit, without interference based on convenience or impatience. The pause that followed was brief. Agreed. And that my rank does not determine the quality of accommodation or treatment I receive within the castle. His eyes held hers steadily. Also agreed. She studied him for a moment, looking for the deception she had been taught to expect. The fine print hidden behind powerful promises. She found nothing she could name, which was either reassuring or the most dangerous thing of all. I will give you my answer by midday, she said. Master Aldrich gave his blessing within 10 minutes. Go, the old man said, not looking up from the poultice he was grinding, his white hair falling forward over his work. I have been waiting for something worthy of you to come along. A pause. It took its time. You are not concerned? She asked. I am always concerned, he said. That is the condition of caring about people. He set down his pestle and looked at her with his faded brown eyes, warm and direct. But concern is not the same as opposition. Take your kit. Take the pine resin. Write to me when you arrive. She embraced him quickly, the way she always did, tightly and without preamble, because she had learned that some feelings didn't improve with extended expression. She packed her things in an hour. 2 changes of clothing, her gray cloak, her healer's kit wrapped in oilcloth, a small pouch of dried herbs, 3 clay pots of salve, and the notebook where she recorded treatments and observations in her small, careful hand. Everything fit in a single saddlebag. Rowan found her in the road just as she was carrying it out. He looked at the bag, then at her face. He didn't say anything for a long moment. You're certain, he said at last. I am, she said. He looked away. Something passed through his expression that she recognized as genuine feeling, complicated and unresolved. She was sorry for it, the way she was sorry for any pain she couldn't treat. If he harms you, Rowan said quietly, I will come. I know, she said, and she meant it kindly. She walked out of Dunveth behind the king's guard with her saddlebag over one shoulder and her braid over the other. And she did not look back, not because she didn't care, but because she had learned that looking back while moving forward only made the road harder to navigate. Beside her, Cinder walked easily, his great strides smooth and even. Ahead, the road curved north toward Valdenor, and the morning light fell across it in long gold lines through the pine trees, and the air smelled of cold stone and wood smoke and distance. She was 23 years old, and she was walking into the unknown. She had done harder things. Valdenor was not what she had expected. She had imagined something cold and severe. All black stone and narrow windows and the particular grimness of power that does not need to justify itself. She had heard stories, the way everyone in the outlying villages heard stories. Fragments and rumors carried by merchants and wandering monks and soldiers passing through. The Alpha King of Valdenor was ruthless. The Alpha King of Valdenor had crushed 3 rival packs in 5 years. The Alpha King of Valdenor did not negotiate. What she had not expected was the smell of baking bread drifting from the castle kitchens as they rode through the main gate, or the stable boys who came running with genuine eagerness when they saw Cinder, or the way the gray stone walls of the inner keep were softened by ivy that had been allowed, deliberately, to grow unchecked across the eastern face. Someone had chosen to let something living climb those walls. That told her something. Oswin led her to the royal stables, while Theron was met by a cluster of waiting advisors, whose faces all carried the particular pinched expression of men who had been holding difficult news for several days. She caught one brief glance from him over their heads as they pulled him toward the great hall. Not apologetic, simply acknowledging. And then he was gone, and she was standing in the wide, clean corridor of the stables, with 47 horses looking at her with varying degrees of curiosity. "Your quarters are above," Oswin said, gesturing toward a wooden staircase at the far end of the building. Connected to the stable by the upper walkway, the king thought proximity would be practical. "It is," she said, meaning it. The room was small but solid. Stone walls, a wooden floor scrubbed pale, a narrow bed with 2 wool blankets, a writing table, a shelf, and a window that looked out over the inner courtyard. On the table, someone had placed a clay pitcher of water and a small bunch of dried lavender. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the lavender. Then she set her saddlebag down, unpacked her things with the methodical efficiency of long practice, and went back to the stables to introduce herself to 47 horses. The court noticed her within the first 3 days. She had expected that. She had not expected the particular shape the attention would take. It came first from a woman named Lady Cressida, the highest-ranking beta noblewoman at court, somewhere in her mid-30s. With auburn hair and sharp green eyes, and the practiced grace of someone who had spent a lifetime ensuring that every room understood her position in it. She appeared at the stable entrance on Sadie's second morning, dressed in deep green wool with a fur-trimmed hood, and looked at Sadie the way one might look at something that had appeared in an unexpected location and not yet been classified. "You are the Omega the king brought from the borderlands," she said. "I am the healer the king brought from Dunveth," Sadie said pleasantly, not looking up from the poultice she was applying to a bay mare with a swollen knee. "My name is Sadie." A pause. "You speak very directly for an Omega." "I find it saves time," Sadie said. Lady Cressida was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, she said, "The bay mare has been favoring that leg for 2 months. Brennan said it would resolve on its own." "It won't," Sadie said. "There's a stone bruise deep in the hoof that has been pressing on the inner tissue. It needs drawing out before the knee swelling will reduce. Another month without treatment, and she would have been permanently lame." She smoothed the poultice and began the outer wrap. "She'll be sound in 10 days. Another pause. Longer this time. "I see," Lady Cressida said, and left. Sadie did not consider that encounter resolved. She considered it a first move in a game whose rules she had not yet fully mapped. Brennan was the second problem. The castle's appointed healer was a beta of perhaps 50, stocky and deliberate in his movements, with the confident authority of a man long accustomed to being the final word on matters of health and treatment within the keep. He had, Oswin quietly informed her, served Valdenor for 22 years. He had set the bones of soldiers and sewn the wounds of lords and seen 3 of the king's own blood through fever and injury. He was, by any reasonable measure, skilled. He was also, by any reasonable measure, offended. He made this clear not through confrontation, he was too careful for that, but through the accumulation of small obstacles. Supplies she requested were slow to arrive. Her access to the castle herb store was initially restricted to a narrow range of common plants. Twice in the first week, she arrived at the stables to find that a horse she had scheduled for treatment had been moved without her knowledge. She documented everything in her notebook, calmly, and said nothing. On the 8th day, she was treating a young stallion with a persistent cough when she heard footsteps on the upper walkway and looked up to find Theron standing at the railing above, watching her work. She did not know how long he had been there. He said nothing, and she returned to her work, and for a while the only sounds were the horses breathing and the wind moving through the stable eaves. "Brennan has been restricting your supplies," he said finally. She looked up. "I have managed." "That is not an answer." "Yes," she said. "He has." A pause. "It will be corrected." "I would rather correct it myself," she said. At his look, she continued, "If it is corrected by royal command, I will spend the next year working in an environment of resentment and deliberate unhelpfulness that will make doing my work harder, not easier. If you will allow me to manage it in my own way, I believe I can reach a different outcome." He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light came through the high stable windows and caught the silver of the scar on his face, and she thought, not for the first time, that he looked like someone who had learned to carry weight the way old timber carries it, not by remaining unchanged, but by growing stronger in the exact places it was tested. "How?" he asked. "Brennan is not cruel," she said. "He is afraid of being made unnecessary, of losing the place he has built here over 20 years. If I make it clear that my work and his work are separate, that I am not here to replace him, but to address a gap he has never claimed expertise in, that fear loses its reason to exist." Theron was quiet. "You studied this man for 8 days," he said. "I study everyone," she said simply. "It is how I understand what is wrong and how to fix it." Something moved in his expression. That deep water shift she had begun to recognize. He looked at her the way he had looked at Cinder that first morning in the Dunveth stable, with the focused stillness of a man recalibrating his understanding of something important. "Do it your way," he said. He straightened from the railing, preparing to leave. Then he paused. The lavender on the table. Was it appropriate or presumptuous? She blinked. She had not expected him to mention it. "It was appropriate," she said carefully. "My late mother kept it in every room," he said, with a quietness that closed the subject as gently as a door. She believed it helped people sleep in unfamiliar places. He left before she could respond. She stood in the stable for a long moment afterward, a stallion's lead rope in her hands, thinking about a king who remembered what his mother believed about lavender and placed a bunch of it in a small room above a stable for a woman he had known for 7 days. She spoke to Brennan that afternoon. She found him in his workroom off the great hall, surrounded by the organized clutter of 20 years, dried bundles hanging from the rafters, clay jars ranked by size along 3 walls, a worn oak work table scarred with the marks of countless preparations. She knocked. He looked up with an expression that was carefully neutral. "I want to show you something," she said, and set her notebook on his work table, open to the page where she had documented the bay mare's condition, the treatment, and the expected recovery timeline. "I have used this method twice before with similar injuries. I thought you might want the record, in case you encounter it again without me." He looked at the page. He did not speak. "I am not here to practice human medicine," she said. "I have no wish to work in your domain, and I have no doubt that your experience with the men and women of this keep far exceeds anything I could offer. But if there is ever a case where the boundary is unclear, I would rather we discuss it directly than work around each other." Brennan looked up from the notebook. His expression had shifted, not warmly, not yet, but with the particular look of a man who had prepared for a fight and found that the other person had set down their weapon. "The pine resin technique," he said after a moment, eyes dropping back to the page. "I have not seen it written this way before. I developed it in the field," she said. "It is not in any text I have found." A long pause. "You should write it properly," he said. "A full account, with proportions and preparation method." He did not look at her when he said it. "For the record." "I will," she said. She left his workroom with the quiet, careful satisfaction of a wound that had been properly cleaned before it had the chance to fester. That night, for the first time since arriving at Valdenor, she slept without dreaming. Outside her window, the courtyard was quiet under a sky full of stars, and somewhere below in the stable, she could hear Cinder moving in his stall with the easy, rhythmic sound of a horse who was exactly where he was supposed to be. She understood the feeling. What she did not know, what she could not have known, lying in the dark with her braid loose across the pillow and the dried lavender faint in the cold air, was that in the great hall below, a sealed letter had arrived from the Veldris clan, and it contained a name. Her name. Theron read the letter 3 times. The first time, standing at the long oak table in his private war chamber, the candles burning low and the embers of the hearth doing little against the chill that had settled into the stone walls overnight. The second time, seated, with the letter flat on the table, and his hands pressed on either side of it as though holding it, still would change what it said. The third time, slowly, word by word, because a man in his position did not act on what he thought he had read. He acted on what he had confirmed. The letter was from Lord Cedric of the Veldris clan, the same clan whose border skirmish had called Theron north 8 days ago, the same clan whose scouts had harassed Valdenor's eastern villages for 2 years with the particular, patient strategy of men who knew they could not win a direct confrontation and had chosen erosion instead. Cedric was not a fool. He was something more dangerous. A patient man with a specific grievance and enough resources to pursue it indefinitely. The letter was politely worded. It was also, beneath the politeness, a threat. "It has come to our attention," it read, "that the Alpha King has taken into his household an Omega healer from the border settlement of Dunveth, one called Sadie. We wish to inform the king that this woman is not without prior claim. She was contracted to the Veldris Pack 3 years past, as a healer's bond, by the terms of a debt owed by her former guardian. That contract was never formally dissolved. We are prepared to discuss terms of release, or, should the king prefer, to allow the matter to be settled by the old laws of Omega bond claim, which remain valid under the Treaty of Ashford." Theron set the letter down. He was quiet for a long time, in the specific way that people who had learned to be dangerous learned to be quiet, not empty, but very, very full. Then he called for Oswin. Sadie did not know about the letter. She spent the morning of that day doing what she had spent every morning doing for the past 10 days, moving through the royal stables with the focused efficiency of someone who had finally arranged a difficult space into a workable order. She had mapped each horse's condition, history, and temperament in her notebook. She had reorganized the stable's supply shelf so that the most commonly needed materials were within reach rather than buried. She had trained 2 of the younger stable hands in the basics of wound observation: what to watch for, what to report, when to come for her in the night, rather than waiting until morning. The horses, for their part, had decided to trust her with the same pragmatic directness that animals always used, not all at once, and not without a period of assessment, but genuinely, once the assessment was complete. She was checking the bay mare's knee, improving steadily, the swelling nearly resolved, when she became aware that she was being watched. Not by Theron. She had developed a sensitivity to his presence over the past 10 days that she did not entirely examine, a kind of peripheral awareness that registered before thought. This was different, cooler, more calculated. She turned. The man standing at the stable entrance was someone she had not seen before. Tall, lean, perhaps 40 years of age, with pale blonde hair worn close to his head and the kind of still, watchful face that revealed nothing and observed everything. He wore a traveling cloak of deep brown wool, dusty from the road, and carried no visible weapon, though she was quite certain that was a choice rather than a fact. "Mistress Sadie?" he said pleasantly, her hand stilled on the mare's bandage. "I don't believe we've met." "No," he said, "but I know a great deal about you. You trained under a healer named Aldrich. You have a particular skill with infected wounds and joint injuries. You developed a treatment using pine resin that is, by all accounts, remarkably effective." He smiled, and the smile did not reach his eyes. "You were also, 3 years ago, placed under a healer's bond claim by Lord Cedric of the Veldris Pack as settlement for a debt." The stable felt very quiet. "That bond," Sadie said carefully, "was made without my knowledge or consent. I was not present when it was arranged." "Under the old laws," the man said, tilting his head slightly, "the consent of an Omega is not required for a bond claim made by a legal guardian. My guardian had no legal right to make that claim," she said. "He was not a blood relation and held no formal wardship. That, he said, is a matter for the Ashford Tribunal to decide. He reached into his cloak and produced a folded document, sealed with dark wax. Lord Cedric extends his respects to the Alpha King and formally requests that the bond claim be honored, pending tribunal review. In the meantime, you are asked to remain within the castle and not to leave Valdenor's jurisdiction. Another smile, thinner this time. For your own protection, of course. He set the document on the stable's supply shelf, turned, and walked away. Sadie stood very still. The bay mare nudged her shoulder gently with her nose, and Sadie reached up and placed her hand against the animal's warm neck, and breathed, because breathing was the first thing, and everything else came after. She went to Theron. Not because she expected him to fix it. Not because she had decided he was the kind of man who fixed things for people without cost. She went because he had been honest with her so far, within the limits of what honesty between a king and an Omega could reasonably look like, and because she needed to know whether he had known about this before she arrived. She found him in the war chamber, with Oswin and 2 other senior guards, and a man she recognized as his legal counsel, an elderly alpha named Gareth, white-bearded and sharp-eyed, with ink permanently stained into the creases of his fingers. They all looked up when she entered. She had not knocked. "You knew," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a question, and it mattered enormously which it was, and she held his gaze while she waited for the answer. "I knew last night," Theron said. "The letter arrived after you had retired. I was determining the appropriate response before informing you. And the man who came to the stable this morning was not supposed to have access to you before I had spoken with you," he said, and the flatness in his voice carried a particular quality. The sound of someone making a mental note about a failure in his household that would be addressed. "I apologize for that." She looked at him for a long moment. "Is the bond claim valid?" Gareth, the counsel, cleared his throat. "Under strict application of the Ashford Treaty's old law provisions, potentially. The circumstances of the original agreement are disputed, and there is significant legal ground to argue against its validity. However, the tribunal process takes time, and during that time, I am effectively bound here," Sadie said. "You were already here," Theron said quietly. "By choice," she said. The distinction mattered, and she needed him to understand that it mattered. Something moved in his expression. "Yes," he said, "by choice, and it will remain so." "How?" He was quiet for a moment. Not the quietness of uncertainty, but the quietness of a man who had already decided and was choosing his words with care. "There is a provision in the Ashford Treaty," Gareth said before Theron could speak, "that supersedes bond claim. If an Omega is formally acknowledged as a member of a pack, not a servant, not an attached healer, but a recognized member, then any prior claim by an outside party is void. The pack's claim supersedes all others." Sadie looked at the old council, then at Theron. "You would offer me pack membership," she said slowly. "I would offer you protection," Theron said. "Formal, legal, permanent. Cedric cannot touch you if you are of Valdenor." "And what does Valdenor require of me in return?" "What you are already doing," he said simply. She studied him. The candlelight moved across his face, and she could see the tiredness around his eyes that she had not noticed in daylight. Not weakness, but the particular exhaustion of a man who had been carrying responsibility for a very long time without putting it down. "This is not how you intended to ask me this," she said. His jaw tightened slightly. "No." "How did you intend to ask?" A long pause. Outside the chamber, the castle moved around them, distant footsteps, the muffled sound of the courtyard, a wind that found its way through the stones and made the candles lean. "Not like this," he said, not with a threat forcing the question. She understood that. She understood it more than she wanted to. because it told her something about him that she had been carefully not thinking about for 10 days. That the lavender on the table, and the attention he paid when she spoke, and the way he had said by choice just now, were not the gestures of a king managing a useful asset. They were something else. Something she did not yet have a name for, or was not yet willing to name. "I need time to think," she said. "You have time," he said. "Cedric's man cannot remove you from this castle, and the tribunal process takes no less than 30 days. Think as long as you need." She nodded once, turned to leave, and then stopped. "Theron," she said. It was the first time she had used his name without the title, and she felt the room register it. Oswin's slight stillness, Gareth's careful study of his documents. She did not look back. "Thank you for not deciding for me." She walked out. Behind her, the war chamber was very quiet. That evening, Rowan arrived at the gates of Valdenor. She saw him from her window. His brown horse, his familiar silhouette. His face turned up toward the castle walls with the expression of a man who had ridden hard and was not entirely sure what he would find. One of the gate guards was speaking to him, and his hands moved with the agitation of someone explaining something urgent. She closed her eyes. Then she pulled on her cloak and went down to meet him. Because whatever came next, she would face it herself. On every front. Rowan had ridden for 2 days without stopping. She could see it in him. The dust on his cloak, the tightness around his eyes, the way he dismounted with the careful deliberateness of someone whose legs had stopped cooperating somewhere around the 2nd day and hadn't fully recovered. He looked at her when she came through the gate, and the relief on his face was so genuine and so unguarded that she felt a sharp, honest tenderness for him, the kind that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with knowing someone well enough to see them clearly. "You're unhurt," he said. "I'm unhurt," she confirmed. He exhaled. Then he looked past her at the castle walls, at the guards, at the quiet authority of the place, and something in his face settled into a new understanding. "He knows about the bond claim," Rowan said. "He told me last night." "And?" She looked at him steadily. "He offered me pack membership, legal protection that would make the claim void." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved between them, cold and carrying the first real edge of winter. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the road in Dunveth when she walked away, with feeling that was genuine and complicated, and slowly, visibly, becoming acceptance. "Is that all he offered?" Rowan asked. Sadie held his gaze. "That is what was said aloud." He nodded, slowly, and she watched him do the thing she had always quietly respected about him, beneath his persistence and his certainty. He listened. When the truth was clear, he listened to it. "Then I came for nothing," he said, not bitterly, plainly. "You came because you care about what happens to me," she said. "That is not nothing." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his saddlebag and produced a small wrapped bundle, oilcloth, tied with cord, and held it out to her. "Master Aldrich sent this, said you forgot it." She unwrapped it. Inside was her copy of Aldrich's primary treatment text. Old, worn at the spine, annotated in both his handwriting and hers throughout the margins. She had not forgotten it. She had left it deliberately, because leaving it had felt like leaving a door open. She held it, and understood that Aldrich had sent it not as a forgotten object, but as a message. "This belongs with you. Go fully, or not at all." "Stay the night," she said to Rowan. "Rest your horse. Eat something. The castle kitchens are generous." He almost smiled. "And in the morning?" "In the morning," she said gently. "You go home." He did. She went to Theron that evening. He was in the war chamber again, alone this time, standing at the window that looked out over the valley, the one that showed Valdenor in all its breadth, the villages and the forests and the river that caught the last light and threw it back like hammered silver, He heard her come in and turned, and she crossed the room and set the oilcloth bundle on the table between them. "I've decided," she said. He waited. "I will accept pack membership," she said. "Not because of Cedric's claim, not because I have no other options, because this is where my work is, and because—" She paused, choosing the next words with the same care she used when choosing the right herb for a difficult wound. "Because I believe this is a place where I can be fully what I am. And I have not had that before." Theron looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "There is something else I would ask," he said, "when the time is right. When it is not clouded by threats or obligation or the pressure of circumstance." His pale eyes held hers with a steadiness that she had learned, over these weeks, was not coldness, but the opposite, the absolute focus of someone who does not look away from what matters. "I would ask it plainly and freely, and I would need your answer to be the same." "I know," she said. "You know what I would ask?" "I know the shape of it," she said. "I have known for some time." Something in him softened. Not collapsed. Not weakened, but softened, the way iron softens in the forge, just before it can be shaped into something new. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, warm, careful, deliberate. And she let him. And they stood like that in the candlelight while the valley went dark outside the window and the first snow of winter began to fall. The tribunal met 4 weeks later. The bond claim was dismissed. Gareth presented the evidence of the guardian's lack of legal standing with the precise, unhurried authority of a man who had been building this argument for 20 years and simply happened to need it now. Lord Cedric's representative made his counter-arguments. The tribunal took 1 afternoon to deliberate. The claim was void. It had always been void. Cedric sent no further letters. In the spring, Theron asked, plainly and freely, in the stable where Cinder stood, watching them both with the patient disinterest of a horse who had already understood what these two humans were taking a very long time to work out. Sadie said, yes. The wedding was held in the great hall of Valdenor on the first warm day of the season, when the ivy on the eastern wall had come back into leaf, and the kitchen smelled of honey and fresh bread. Oswin wept quietly and denied it. Brennan attended and brought a written copy of the pine resin treatment, properly formatted as a gift. Lady Cressida wore green and was gracious in the measured way of someone who has recalibrated and found the new arrangement acceptable. Master Aldrich came from Dunveth on a borrowed mule and sat in the front row, and did not say "I told you so," which was its own kind of eloquence. Rowan did not attend, but he sent a letter, brief and sincere, wishing her well. She read it twice, smiled once, and kept it. Sadie never stopped being a healer. She was an Omega, and a queen, and a healer, and she held all three without apology and without conflict, because she had learned, slowly, in stables and sick rooms and war chambers, and one quiet evening with candlelight and falling snow, that the things you are do not diminish each other. They accumulate. They become, in time, something greater than any one of them alone. Cinder lived another 12 years, which was very old for a warhorse, and entirely typical for an animal with an exceptional healer. On the last morning of his life, Sadie sat beside him in the straw, the way she had once sat beside him in a small stable in Dunveth. Her hand flat against his neck, feeling the warmth slowly leave. Theron was there too, his shoulder against hers, his hand over hers. They did not speak. Some things did not need words. Some things had been said, fully and finally, long before this moment, in the mud at the edge of the ashwood, in 7 days of careful tending, in a letter that contained a name, in a question asked plainly in the spring. All of it had been, from the beginning, about a horse who refused to die, and a woman who refused to let him. Everything else had simply followed.